What do a Japanese yurei, a Mexican La Llorona, and a Scottish Grey Lady have in common? They're all ghosts, sure. But more than that, they're all answers to the same impossible question. What happens when someone dies with something unfinished? Every culture asks this question. Every culture answers it. From the Arctic Circle to the Australian outback, humans have always believed that death isn't quite the end. Even more fascinating, despite having no contact with each other for thousands of years, cultures on opposite sides of the planet developed remarkably similar ideas about what ghosts want, how they behave, and why they linger. Tonight on Midnight Deep Dive, we're traveling the world to meet its ghosts. From vengeful Japanese yurei to protective African ancestors, from wailing Latin American spirits to mischievous Middle Eastern Djinn, we'll explore how different cultures understand death, the afterlife, and those mysterious beings who exist between worlds. So settle in, let the weight of your body sink into comfort, and drift peacefully as we uncover the spirits that haunt every corner of our world. There's something profound about standing in a cemetery at dusk, regardless of which continent you're on. The light fades in that particular way that makes shadows stretch and deepen. The air takes on a different quality, and you become acutely aware that you're in a place dedicated to the dead. In this moment, whether you're in a Buddhist temple cemetery in Kyoto, a Catholic graveyard in Buenos Aires, or a Muslim burial ground in Cairo, you're participating in something fundamentally human. The acknowledgement that death deserves space, ritual, and remembrance. Anthropologists have spent over a century documenting human cultures, from isolated Amazonian tribes to Arctic communities, from Pacific Islanders to nomadic desert peoples. And here's what they've found, without exception. Every single one has beliefs about what happens after death, and almost all include some concept of spirits or ghosts. This isn't coincidence or cultural contamination. It's something deeply embedded in how human brains work. The earliest evidence we have of ghost beliefs goes back over 40,000 years. Neanderthals buried their dead with flowers and tools, suggesting they believed the deceased would need these items in some form of afterlife. Later, when anatomically modern humans began creating art, they painted scenes that seemed to show shamans communicating with spirit worlds, figures that exist between human and animal, between living and dead. But why? What is it about the human experience that makes ghost beliefs so universal? Cognitive scientists suggest several fascinating explanations. First, our brains are incredibly good at pattern recognition, sometimes too good. We're hardwired to detect agency, to assume that movements and sounds are caused by conscious beings. This kept our ancestors alive when that rustling in the bushes might be a predator. But it also means we see intention and presence where there might be none. A creaking house becomes footsteps. A shadow becomes a figure. Our survival instinct creates ghosts from uncertainty. Second, humans have what psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to imagine what others are thinking and feeling. This remarkable capability lets us build complex societies, but it comes with an interesting side effect. We can't quite turn it off, even for the dead. When someone we love dies, our brains keep modeling their thoughts and reactions. We imagine what they would say, how they would feel, what they would want. In a very real neurological sense, the dead continue to exist in our minds as active agents. Third, and perhaps most importantly, humans are uniquely aware of our own mortality. We know we're going to die, and this knowledge creates what anthropologists call mortality anxiety. Ghost beliefs offer comfort against this anxiety. They suggest that death isn't absolute cessation, that something of us persists, that the people we love don't simply vanish into nothing. What's remarkable is how consistent certain ghost characteristics are across completely isolated cultures. Ghosts are almost universally associated with unfinished business, with deaths that were somehow wrong or incomplete. A person who dies peacefully, surrounded by family, properly buried with appropriate rituals, rarely becomes a ghost. But someone murdered, someone who dies far from home, someone whose body isn't recovered or properly buried, someone with unfulfilled obligations, these are the spirits who linger. This makes a certain psychological sense. These are the deaths that trouble the living most, the losses that feel incomplete or unjust. Ghost stories let communities process trauma, explain misfortune, and maintain social bonds beyond death. They also reinforce cultural values. Properly honor the dead, fulfill your obligations, don't die with grudges unresolved. Most cultures also share ideas about how to manage relationships with ghosts. Offerings are nearly universal, whether it's burning incense in China, leaving food on Day of the Dead altars in Mexico, or pouring libations in West Africa. The logic is consistent. The dead still have needs and desires, and maintaining good relationships with them requires reciprocity, just like relationships among the living. The concept of good versus bad deaths appears across cultures too. A death in old age after a full life surrounded by descendants, this is a good death. The person's spirit will likely be benevolent, watching over the family, perhaps reincarnating or moving peacefully to an afterlife. But a violent death, a death in youth, a death far from home, these create dangerous spirits. They're angry, confused, envious of the living. They need to be appeased, controlled, or sometimes exorcised entirely. Geography shapes ghost stories in predictable ways. Island cultures often have ghost ships and drowned sailors. Desert peoples have spirits that lead travelers astray. Mountain communities have spirits associated with peaks and passes. Agricultural societies have spirits connected to harvest and fertility. But underneath these local variations, the fundamental logic remains the same. Death creates transition, transition creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates stories about those who exist between worlds. What's perhaps most beautiful about this universal pattern is what it reveals about human nature. Despite our vast differences in language, technology, and social organization, despite thousands of years of isolation between populations, we all arrived at similar ways of coping with death and loss. We all decided that our connections to each other don't simply end when the heart stops beating. We all found comfort in believing that love, memory, and presence can transcend the boundary between living and dead. In the 7th month of the lunar calendar, something shifts across East and Southeast Asia. Shops burn incense outside their doors. Families prepare elaborate meals for unseen guests. Theaters leave front row seats empty. The air itself feels different, charged with presence and possibility. This is Ghost Month, when the boundary between the living world and the realm of the dead grows thin and spirits walk freely among us. The Chinese concept of the hungry ghost, or egui, represents one of the most elaborate and psychologically sophisticated ghost traditions in the world. These aren't simple spirits of the dead. They're beings trapped in a state of perpetual suffering, driven by insatiable desires they can never fulfill. Imagine a ghost with a mouth the size of a needle and a stomach the size of a mountain, forever hungry but unable to eat. Or spirits whose throats burn with fire, so that anything they try to drink turns to flames. These hungry ghosts aren't necessarily evil, they're pitiable. They became this way through bad karma, through lives lived selfishly or greedily, or sometimes simply through the misfortune of dying without descendants to perform proper rituals. They wander the earth in torment, and during Ghost Month, the living have a responsibility to ease their suffering through offerings and prayers. The Ghost Festival, also called Zhongyuanjai, transforms cities and villages across China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and other Chinese communities worldwide. Families prepare elaborate feasts, but before anyone eats, portions are offered to ghosts. Paper money is burned, not real currency, but specially printed hell money that the spirits can use in the afterlife. Incense smoke carries prayers upward. Street corners become temporary shrines. The entire month becomes an exercise in compassion toward beings who suffer in ways the living can barely imagine. But Ghost Month isn't just about hungry ghosts. It's about maintaining proper relationships with all deceased ancestors. Chinese cosmology includes multiple afterlife destinations. The best ancestors reside in a heavenly realm, but they can still visit during Ghost Month. Others exist in various states of transition or judgment. The truly unfortunate become hungry ghosts, and some spirits, particularly those who died violently or unjustly, become something more dangerous. Japanese ghost traditions share roots with Chinese beliefs, but evolved in distinctive directions. The yurei, Japanese ghosts, are among the most visually iconic spirits in the world. Picture the classic image. A figure in a white burial kimono, long black hair hanging forward to obscure the face, sometimes with no feet, drifting rather than walking. This image has become so powerful that it's influenced ghost movies worldwide, from The Ring to countless horror films. But yurei aren't just scary movie monsters. They represent deep cultural anxieties about death, obligation, and emotional attachment. Most yurei are onryo, vengeful spirits who died with such intense emotions that they couldn't move on. The most famous is probably Oiwa, whose husband poisoned her, causing her face to become horribly disfigured before she died. Her story has been retold in Japanese theater and film for over 200 years, and actors performing in plays about Oiwa traditionally visit her shrine to ask permission, believing her spirit still watches. What makes Japanese ghost stories particularly interesting is their focus on emotional attachment as the force that creates ghosts. A woman who dies longing for her lover becomes a yurei. A mother who dies with children still needing her care becomes a yurei. Strong emotions, left unresolved, chain spirits to the physical world. This reflects Buddhist concepts about attachment being the source of suffering, even beyond death. Korean ghost traditions include the Chinyeo Gwishin, virgin ghosts of unmarried women who died before experiencing love and marriage. These spirits are often depicted wearing vibrant red wedding clothes, simultaneously symbols of celebration and tragedy. They represent deep cultural concerns about women dying without fulfilling their socially prescribed roles. Some stories portray them as dangerous, luring men to their deaths. Others present them as pitiful, seeking the marriages they were denied in life. Southeast Asian ghost beliefs blend influences from China and India with indigenous traditions, creating rich and complex spirit worlds. Thai ghosts include the Phi Tai Hong, spirits of people who died violent or sudden deaths. These are considered extremely dangerous because they died with their life force still strong, creating powerful and often malevolent ghosts. Special monks who specialize in dealing with spirits must perform elaborate rituals to pacify them. The Phi Tai Hong Thang Klam, ghost of a woman who died pregnant, is particularly feared in Thai culture. She appears with her unborn child still visible, seeking revenge on those she blames for her death or simply terrorizing the living out of grief and rage. Protection against such spirits involves amulets, sacred tattoos, and maintaining respectful behavior, especially around places where violent deaths occurred. In the Philippines, ghost beliefs reflect layers of indigenous animism, Catholic influence from Spanish colonization, and neighboring Asian traditions. The aswang, while technically more than ghosts, represent spirits that can separate from their bodies at night. The multo are traditional ghosts, often appearing where they died or were buried. What's fascinating is how Catholic elements merged with indigenous beliefs, creating spirits that might haunt churches or respond to Catholic prayers and rituals. Vietnamese ancestor veneration places enormous importance on maintaining altars in the home, where photographs, incense, and offerings keep deceased family members present in daily life. The spirits of ancestors aren't distant or frightening. They're active participants in family decisions, watching over descendants, and deserving regular respect and consultation. The difference between honored ancestors and dangerous ghosts often comes down to whether they receive proper ritual attention from living family members. Across all these Asian traditions runs a common thread. Ghosts aren't necessarily supernatural in the Western sense. They're part of the natural order, a consequence of the way karma, emotion, and ritual interact. They're not separate from daily life but woven into it. Managing relationships with the dead is as important as managing relationships with the living, requiring similar attention to obligation, respect, and reciprocity. The elaborate rituals developed across Asia for dealing with ghosts reflect sophisticated understanding of grief, trauma, and social obligation. Burning paper offerings gives families something active to do with their grief. Preparing food for the dead maintains connection across the boundary of death. Annual ghost festivals create communal spaces for processing loss and honoring memory. These traditions don't just manage supernatural threats, they manage very human needs for continuing bonds with those we've lost. There's a sound that haunts waterways across Latin America, from the rivers of Mexico to the canals of Colombia. It's a woman's voice crying out in anguish, "Ay, mis hijos. Where are my children?" The wailing rises and falls, sometimes near, sometimes far, always filled with bottomless grief. Mothers warn their children about staying out late, about going too close to water. La Llorona is listening. La Llorona is searching. And if she mistakes you for one of her lost children, you may never come home. The legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman, exists in hundreds of versions across Latin America and the Latino communities of the United States. The basic story remains consistent. A woman drowns her children, usually in a moment of rage or despair, and then immediately regrets it. Overcome with grief and guilt, she drowns herself as well, but death brings no peace. She's condemned to wander eternally, searching for the children she murdered, weeping and wailing, sometimes trying to drag living children into the water to replace her lost ones. But here's what makes La Llorona so culturally significant. Her story adapts to reflect local concerns while maintaining its emotional core. In some versions, she's an indigenous woman betrayed by a Spanish conquistador, drowning their mixed-race children in fury at his abandonment. In others, she's a poor woman who kills her children to escape poverty. Some versions portray her as actively malevolent, others as tragically pitiable. She's simultaneously a cautionary tale about controlling anger, a horror story to keep children safe, and a meditation on motherhood, loss, and irrevocable choices. The flexibility of La Llorona's story has allowed it to persist for centuries and spread across continents. Mexican American communities tell La Llorona stories that incorporate modern elements. She appears near highways, in parks, around suburban drainage channels, but the emotional truth remains unchanged. Maternal love and maternal violence are two sides of the same intense bond, and some losses are so devastating they echo beyond death. What distinguishes Latin American ghost traditions is how they blend indigenous, Catholic, and African influences into something unique. The Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, exemplifies this synthesis beautifully. On the surface, it might seem like a Catholic celebration timed around All Saints and All Souls Days. But its roots reach back to Aztec festivals honoring the dead, particularly the goddess Mictlacacihuatl, Lady of the Dead. On Dia de los Muertos, celebrated primarily on November 1st and 2nd, the boundary between the living and dead becomes permeable. Families create ofrendas, altars decorated with marigold flowers whose scent guides spirits home, photographs of the deceased, their favorite foods and drinks, candles and sugar skulls bearing their names. The atmosphere isn't somber or frightening, it's celebratory. Death is acknowledged as natural, even beautiful, and the dead are welcomed back as honored guests. This reflects a fundamentally different relationship with death than many cultures maintain. The dead aren't completely gone, they're in another place, but remain part of the family. They need to know they're remembered and loved. In return, they watch over their descendants, offering protection and guidance. Neglecting the dead is unthinkable, not because it might create dangerous ghosts, but because it would be profoundly disrespectful to family members who simply happen to be deceased. Brazilian ghost traditions reflect the country's complex religious landscape, where Catholicism intermingles with indigenous beliefs and African traditions brought by enslaved peoples. Umbanda and Candomblé, Afro-Brazilian religions, maintain sophisticated relationships with spirits of the dead. Pretos Velhos, spirits of enslaved Africans, are invoked for wisdom and healing. Caboclos, spirits of indigenous peoples, offer protection and spiritual strength. These aren't threatening ghosts but helpful ancestors who continue to serve their communities. The Brazilian ghost called Corpo Seco, the dried corpse, tells a different kind of story. According to legend, this was a man so cruel in life that even the earth rejected his body after death. Neither heaven nor hell would accept him, so he wanders eternally, neither fully alive nor properly dead. He appears as a withered figure that frightens people and animals. The story serves as a powerful warning about the consequences of living without compassion or community bonds. Colombian ghost stories include the Mater Monte, a spirit of mountains and forests who appears as a woman covered in moss and vegetation. She's not a ghost in the traditional sense, but rather a protective spirit of nature who punishes those who harm the forest or mistreat the land. This reflects indigenous environmental ethics persisting through colonization and modernization, maintaining the idea that nature itself has consciousness and agency. The Guatemalan Xtabe represents another synthesis of indigenous and colonial beliefs. She appears as a beautiful woman who lures men into the forest, where they become lost or die. Some versions portray her as a spirit of a woman who died of heartbreak, others as a nature spirit or even a demon. What's consistent is her association with ceiba trees, which hold sacred significance in Mayan cosmology as connections between the underworld, earth, and heavens. Puerto Rican ghost traditions include the Garabado, a spirit that appears as a grotesque figure with twisted limbs and a hooked staff. The Chupacabra, while technically a cryptid rather than a ghost, reflects similar concerns about unexplained deaths and the porousness of boundaries between natural and supernatural. These stories often emerge from rural communities, processing economic hardship, violence, and loss through supernatural narratives. What unifies Latin American ghost traditions is their emotional intensity. These aren't quiet, subtle hauntings. They're loud, dramatic, and deeply felt. La Llorona wails. The dead at Dia de los Muertos are celebrated with music, dancing, and joy. Brazilian spirit possession involves ecstatic movement and transformation. This reflects broader cultural patterns where emotions are expressed openly rather than suppressed, where death is acknowledged loudly rather than whispered about. Latin American ghosts also tend to serve clear social functions. They mark dangerous places, keeping children away from deep water or busy roads. They enforce moral behavior, warning about the consequences of cruelty, betrayal, or breaking social bonds. They maintain cultural memory, preserving stories of colonization, resistance, and survival. And they keep the dead present, refusing to relegate ancestors to distant memory or abstract heaven. In many ways, Latin American ghost traditions resist the Western Enlightenment project of separating rational and supernatural, natural and spiritual. The dead aren't supernatural, they're part of nature, part of family, part of the ongoing story of community. Maintaining relationships with them isn't superstition, it's social obligation and emotional necessity. The boundary between living and dead remains permeable, not because the living are primitive or credulous, but because love, memory, and obligation don't recognize death as an absolute ending. The Tower of London stands beside the Thames, its Norman stone walls holding more than 9 centuries of British history within their cold embrace. On winter nights, guards report seeing a headless figure walking the ramparts, a woman in Tudor dress eternally searching for the head she lost to the executioner's axe. Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VI, beheaded on false charges of adultery and treason, has been seen so many times that her appearances are practically part of the official history. The tower isn't just haunted by history, it's haunted by the stories that history created, by deaths so unjust or violent that they seem to have left permanent impressions on the fabric of the place itself. European ghost traditions are among the oldest continuously documented in the world, stretching back thousands of years through written records and archaeological evidence. The ancient Greeks wrote extensively about ghosts and proper burial practices. Homer's Odyssey includes scenes of the dead speaking to Odysseus, and Greek tragedy often featured ghosts demanding vengeance or justice. The Greeks believed that souls without proper burial rites wandered eternally, neither fully dead nor able to rest, creating dangerous spirits that could afflict the living. Roman ghost beliefs evolved from Greek traditions, but added their own distinctive elements. They distinguished between different types of spirits. The Manes were ancestral spirits who deserved respect and offerings. The Lemures were malevolent ghosts of those who died violently or weren't properly buried, and the larvae were specifically frightening ghosts who appeared to terrify. Romans held festivals like Lemuria, where families performed rituals to appease dangerous spirits, walking barefoot through their homes at midnight, spitting black beans and making protective gestures. The famous letter from Pliny the Younger, written around 100 CE, describes what might be the first documented ghost investigation in Western literature. He tells of a haunted house in Athens, avoided because of terrifying sounds of rattling chains and the appearance of a gaunt old man. A philosopher rented the house cheaply, remained calm when the ghost appeared, and followed it to the garden where it vanished. Excavation revealed a skeleton in chains, which, when properly buried, ended the haunting. The story contains elements that would become standard in European ghost lore: unfinished business, improper burial, investigation, and resolution through proper ritual. Medieval Christianity transformed European ghost beliefs significantly. The Church taught that souls went to heaven, hell, or purgatory, not wandering the earth. Ghosts became theologically problematic. If souls were being judged by God, how could they appear to the living? The solution was complex. Some apparitions might be souls temporarily released from purgatory to request prayers and masses to speed their salvation. Others might be demons disguising themselves as the dead to tempt or frighten the living. Determining which was which became a matter of theological importance. Medieval ghost stories often carried moral messages. Ghosts appeared to reveal hidden sins, to identify murderers, to request unpaid debts be settled, or to warn about the dangers of dying in a state of sin. The ghost of a knight might return to confess a secret crime. The spirit of a merchant might reveal stolen goods. These stories reinforced church teaching about judgment, penance, and the importance of dying in good standing with religious authorities. British ghost traditions developed particularly rich layers of haunting lore. The Grey Lady appears in castles and manor houses across Britain, usually identified as a woman who died of heartbreak or was murdered by a jealous husband. The White Lady haunts crossroads and remote paths, often associated with lovers waiting for men who never returned from war or sea. These color-coded ghosts create a taxonomy of haunting, where visual details convey information about the spirit's story and nature. Scottish ghost traditions include the banshee, though this spirit is more common in Irish lore. The Scottish version, the Bean Nye, is a washerwoman spirit seen washing bloody grave clothes at streams, an omen that someone nearby will soon die. She's not malevolent, simply performing her eternal task, but encountering her brings a heavy knowledge of approaching death. This reflects Scottish attitudes toward fate and the belief that death announces itself through supernatural signs to those who know how to read them. Irish ghost lore is inseparable from fairy lore, creating complex interactions between different types of supernatural beings. The banshee serves certain families, wailing to announce imminent death among family members. Her cry is described as the most sorrowful sound imaginable, a keening that chills the blood and confirms the worst fears. But she's not causing death, merely announcing it, fulfilling an ancient obligation to the families she serves. Eastern European ghost traditions often blend with vampire lore. In Slavic cultures, certain types of deaths created dangerous revenants that rose from graves to attack the living. These weren't necessarily drinking blood, they might simply suffocate sleepers or spread disease. The measures taken against them, staking through the heart, decapitation, burning, reflect deep anxieties about proper death and burial. Someone who took their own life, who was excommunicated, or who was suspected of witchcraft might become a dangerous spirit, requiring preventive measures. Scandinavian traditions include the draugr, a corporeal undead being that guards treasure in burial mounds. Unlike ghosts, draugr have physical bodies, super strength, and the ability to change size. They're more like zombies than spirits, but they represent similar anxieties about the dead not staying properly deceased, about wealth creating obligations that persist beyond death, about ancient warriors refusing to accept their defeat by time and mortality. Mediterranean ghost ships appear in lore from Greece to Spain to Italy. The Flying Dutchman, doomed to sail eternally, unable to make port, became one of Europe's most enduring ghost legends. Sailors reported seeing ghost ships with tattered sails crewed by skeletal figures, omens of storms or disaster. These stories reflected the real dangers of maritime life and the frequency with which sailors disappeared without trace, lost at sea with no bodies to bury and no closure for grieving families. What's striking about European ghost traditions is how they've been documented, debated, and rationalized throughout history. Unlike cultures where ghost beliefs remain primarily oral, Europeans wrote extensively about ghosts, creating treatises on their nature, arguing about whether they existed, documenting supposed encounters, and developing theories about what they might be. This textual tradition preserved ghost stories, but also subjected them to skepticism and analysis that transformed how Europeans understood supernatural phenomena. The Enlightenment brought new tensions to European ghost beliefs. Rationalist philosophy rejected supernatural explanations, but ghost stories persisted. Gothic literature emerged, treating ghosts as literary devices while maintaining their emotional power. The Victorian era saw spiritualism flourish alongside scientific materialism, creating elaborate rituals for contacting the dead, while scientists sought to debunk or explain away supernatural claims. Modern European ghost tourism has transformed historical hauntings into economic resources. Castles advertise their ghost residents. Cities offer ghost walks through historic districts. Bed and breakfasts promote their spectral guests. This commercialization hasn't killed belief in ghosts so much as transformed it, turning haunting from frightening reality into entertaining possibility, from religious concern into cultural heritage. Yet genuine ghost beliefs persist across Europe, particularly in rural areas and older communities. People still report encounters, still avoid certain places after dark, still tell stories about spirits who walk old roads or appear in family homes. The ancient patterns persist beneath modern rationality, suggesting that whatever psychological or social functions ghost beliefs serve, they remain relevant even in highly educated, technologically advanced societies. In a village compound in West Africa, an elder dies surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The funeral lasts days, involving elaborate rituals, sacrifices, music, dancing, and feasting. But this isn't goodbye. The elder isn't leaving the family, simply moving to another form of existence. A place will be prepared at the family shrine. Regular offerings will be made. Before important decisions, the family will consult the ancestor spirits. The deceased remains an active, vital member of the family, continuing to guide, protect, and sometimes discipline descendants. Death hasn't ended the relationship, merely transformed it. This concept, which anthropologist John M. Beatty famously called the living dead, represents a fundamentally different understanding of what happens after death than many ghost traditions. African ancestral spirits aren't ghosts in the Western sense, wandering in confusion or trapped by unfinished business. They're family members who have completed their earthly lives and now serve in a different capacity, as intermediaries between the living and the divine, as guardians of tradition and morality, as sources of blessing or correction for their descendants. The transition from living person to ancestor isn't automatic. It requires proper death, someone who lived a full life, who fulfilled their social obligations, who left descendants to remember them. Most importantly, it requires correct burial rituals. These ceremonies don't just honor the deceased, they transform them. Without proper rituals, the dead person cannot become an ancestor. They remain confused, dangerous, potentially harmful to the living, because they haven't been properly integrated into the world of spirits. In many West African traditions, the deceased must be ritually shown their new home and responsibilities. Libations are poured, inviting them to accept their new role. Offerings of food and drink demonstrate that the living will continue to care for them. In return, ancestors provide protection, prosperity, and guidance. They might appear in dreams to warn of danger or offer advice. They might possess family members during ceremonies, speaking directly to address family problems. They remain intimately involved in the daily life of their descendants. The Yoruba people of Nigeria and Benin have particularly elaborate ancestral traditions. The concept of Egungun includes ancestral spirits that can be invoked through masquerade ceremonies. Performers wearing elaborate costumes are believed to be possessed by or channeling ancestral spirits, allowing the ancestors to appear physically among the living. These ceremonies aren't entertainment, they're sacred rituals where the boundary between living and dead becomes permeable, allowing direct communication and blessing. Among the Akan people of Ghana, the relationship with ancestors involves reciprocal obligations. Descendants must provide regular offerings, maintain burial sites, and uphold family honor. In return, ancestors protect the family from harm, bring prosperity, and maintain the family's standing in the community. Neglecting ancestral duties brings misfortune. Illnesses, financial troubles, or persistent bad luck might be diagnosed as ancestral displeasure, requiring special ceremonies and offerings to restore harmony. South African traditions include the Amadlozi among Zulu peoples, ancestral spirits that must be properly honored and consulted. Sangomas, traditional healers, often receive their calling through ancestral spirits appearing in dreams or causing illness that can only be resolved by accepting the role of mediating between living and dead. The ancestors choose who will serve them in this capacity, and refusing the call brings suffering until the person accepts their destiny. But not all African spirits are benevolent ancestors. The Takalosh of Zulu and Xhosa traditions is a dwarf-like creature, more demon than ghost, that can be sent by witches to cause harm. People sometimes raise their beds on bricks to prevent the Takalosh from reaching them at night. This spirit represents the shadow side of spiritual power, the possibility that supernatural forces can be manipulated for harmful purposes, requiring protective measures and the help of more powerful good spirits. Ethiopian traditions blend indigenous African beliefs with Coptic Christianity and Islamic influences, creating unique spirit concepts. The Zar spirits, while not technically ancestors, possess people and must be appeased through elaborate ceremonies involving music, dancing, and specific offerings. Zar possession is often diagnosed when someone experiences unexplained illness or emotional distress, and managing the relationship with one's Zar spirit becomes a lifelong practice. East African traditions include beliefs about spirits associated with specific places, not just family lineages. A particularly old baobab tree might house spirits. A spring or waterfall might be home to spirits that must be respected. These aren't ancestors, but nature spirits that predated human settlement and will outlast it. Showing respect to such spirits isn't superstition but ecological wisdom, recognizing that humans are part of nature, not separate from or superior to it. The Maasai people traditionally left their dead exposed for scavengers rather than burying them, believing that burial polluted the earth. This practice reflected different ideas about the relationship between bodies and spirits. The spirit didn't require the body to persist, and returning the body to nature through scavengers was more respectful than interring it in earth. However, under pressure from neighboring peoples and colonial authorities, burial practices changed, but the underlying belief in spiritual continuity beyond physical death remained. Madagascar's Famidihana ceremony, or turning of the bones, involves exhuming ancestors, rewrapping them in fresh shrouds, and celebrating with music and dancing while carrying the wrapped remains. This isn't macabre but joyful, an opportunity to reconnect physically with ancestors, to share family news with them, to reaffirm bonds that death hasn't broken. The ancestors literally rejoin family celebrations, their presence physical and immediate rather than distant and abstract. What's crucial to understand about African ancestral traditions is that they're not primitive or pre-scientific beliefs waiting to be replaced by modern rationality. They're sophisticated systems for maintaining social cohesion, transmitting values across generations, processing grief, and creating continuity between past and future. The ancestors aren't imaginary. They're the accumulated wisdom, experience, and genetic legacy of previous generations, given voice and agency through ritual and belief. Colonialism and missionary activity attempted to suppress African ancestral practices, labeling them as paganism or devil worship. But these traditions proved remarkably resilient, persisting alongside or blending with Christianity and Islam. African diaspora communities in the Americas maintained ancestral practices despite enslavement, creating new religious systems like Vodou, Santeria, and Candomblé that preserved West African spiritual concepts in hostile environments. Modern African communities navigate between traditional ancestral beliefs and contemporary religious and secular worldviews. Urban, educated Africans might intellectually reject ancestral spirits while still participating in family rituals. The pull of tradition, community, and family obligation often proves stronger than abstract rational skepticism. Even those who have converted to Christianity or Islam often maintain some relationship with ancestral practices, seeing no contradiction between honoring family elders and worshiping God. The African concept of ancestors offers something valuable that many modern ghost traditions lack: agency for the living in their relationships with the dead. You're not helplessly haunted by frightening ghosts. You maintain active, reciprocal relationships with ancestors through offerings, prayers, and respectful behavior. This gives bereaved people something constructive to do with their grief, transforms passive suffering into active devotion, and maintains the presence of the deceased as a positive force in family life. The desert at midnight holds mysteries that daylight cannot penetrate. Shadows move where no physical form exists. The wind carries voices speaking in no human language. Ancient ruins seem to pulse with invisible presence. In these liminal spaces, between day and night, between human settlement and wild emptiness, the Djinn move freely through a world that overlaps with ours, but operates by different rules. Djinn are not ghosts, not in the way most cultures understand that term. They're not deceased humans lingering in the physical world. According to Islamic tradition, they're a separate creation, beings made from smokeless fire, while humans were made from clay and angels from light. They have free will like humans, can be Muslim or non-Muslim, good or evil, helpful or harmful. They live in a parallel world that occasionally intersects with ours, and these intersections create the supernatural encounters that humans experience. The Quran acknowledges jinn as real, not metaphorical or superstitious. This gives them a different status than ghosts in many other religious traditions. They're not violations of natural law, but part of natural law, creatures that follow their own patterns and rules. Islamic scholars have written extensively about jinn, their nature, their powers, and how Muslims should interact with them. Protection from harmful jinn involves reciting specific Quranic verses, particularly Ayat al-Kursi, which is believed to create a protective barrier. Jinn are said to live much longer than humans, potentially for thousands of years. They have their own societies, families, and civilizations, parallel to human ones but invisible to us most of the time. They can shape-shift, appearing as humans, animals, or fantastical creatures. They can possess humans, causing illness or madness. They can move objects, create illusions, and travel vast distances instantaneously. In many ways, they're more similar to European fairies than to ghosts, tricksters and powerful beings that humans must treat with respect and caution. Pre-Islamic Arabian traditions included complex beliefs about various types of spirits. The gull was a shape-shifting demon that haunted graveyards and empty places, luring travelers to their deaths. These creatures appear in 1001 Nights and other classical Arabic literature, representing dangers of the wilderness and the violation of sacred spaces like burial grounds. The word ghoul in English derives from gull, though its meaning has shifted significantly. Persian traditions added their own layers to Middle Eastern spirit beliefs. Peri were beautiful, winged spirits, generally benevolent but capable of mischief. Div were malevolent demons, often depicted as ugly and frightening. These beings appear throughout Persian literature and art, and Persian concepts influenced Islamic interpretations of spiritual beings, as Islam spread through the former Persian Empire. The story of King Solomon's power over jinn appears in both Islamic and Jewish traditions. Solomon was said to have been given authority over jinn by God, compelling them to build his temple and serve him. He imprisoned rebellious jinn in bottles and vessels, a motif that appears in countless tales, including Aladdin's lamp. This story reflects human desires to control supernatural forces, to make the dangerous and unpredictable serve human purposes. Modern Middle Eastern communities maintain complex relationships with jinn beliefs. Urban, educated Arabs might dismiss jinn as superstition, yet many still avoid certain places at certain times, still recite protective prayers, still attribute unexplained phenomena to jinn activity. The belief persists across social classes and education levels, because it's integrated into religious worldview, not separate from it. Jinn possession is taken seriously throughout the Middle East. When someone exhibits unusual behavior, speaks in strange voices, demonstrates knowledge they shouldn't possess, or suffers from illnesses that don't respond to medical treatment, jinn possession might be suspected. Exorcism rituals, called ruqya in Islam, involve Quran recitation and prayer, rather than the dramatic confrontations depicted in Western exorcism films. The goal is to compel the jinn to leave by invoking God's authority and reminding the jinn that possessing a human violates Islamic law. Jewish mystical traditions include similar beings. The Dybbuk of Kabbalah is a malicious spirit, specifically the soul of a deceased person that possesses the living. Unlike jinn, Dybbuks are explicitly ghosts, but they serve similar narrative functions, explaining mental illness, accounting for personality changes, and providing frameworks for spiritual intervention. Exorcising a Dybbuk requires a rabbi skilled in mystical practices, and the rituals are elaborate and dangerous. What distinguishes Middle Eastern spirit beliefs from many ghost traditions is the emphasis on these beings having their own agency and motivations independent of human concerns. A Western ghost typically haunts because of something humans did, murdered them, wronged them, failed to bury them properly. Djinn act according to their own interests. They might interact with humans, but they're not defined by those interactions. They have their own lives, their own purposes, their own societies. This creates different ethical considerations. You can't simply appease a Djinn with offerings the way you might honor an ancestor. You must negotiate, set boundaries, sometimes fight. Protection involves maintaining spiritual purity, regular prayer, and avoiding behaviors or places that attract negative Djinn attention. Living ethically protects you not because it appeases spirits, but because it maintains your spiritual strength and God's protection. The oral tradition of Djinn stories remains vibrant throughout the Middle East. Families share accounts of encounters, warnings about dangerous places, strategies for protection. These aren't ancient folklore but living traditions that incorporate modern elements. Djinn appear in cities, interact with technology, adapt to contemporary life while maintaining their essential nature. Someone might report seeing a Djinn disguised as a specific car model, or warn about Djinn activity in a new development built over an old cemetery. What's particularly fascinating is how Djinn beliefs provide explanatory frameworks that coexist with modern science and technology. A person might accept medical explanations for most illnesses, but still attribute certain conditions to Djinn activity. An engineer might build bridges and dams while still avoiding certain desert areas at night because of Djinn. The beliefs aren't contradictory to scientific worldview, but operate in parallel, addressing different questions and different types of experiences. Before European contact, the Americas were home to thousands of distinct cultures, each with their own languages, traditions, and spiritual beliefs. From the Arctic to Tierra del Fuego, from Pacific Islands to Atlantic coasts, indigenous peoples developed rich understandings of death, spirits, and the boundaries between visible and invisible worlds. These beliefs weren't primitive superstitions, but sophisticated philosophical systems that connected cosmology, ethics, ecology, and community in ways that Western categories like ghost often fail to capture. Among many Native American peoples, the concept of the soul is more complex than a simple binary of body and spirit. The Lakota traditionally believed in 4 aspects of the soul. The Nagi was the spirit that could become a ghost if not properly released through ceremony. The Nia was the life breath that returned to the winds. The Nagila was the shadow or ghost form. The Sikun was the personal power or medicine. Understanding death required acknowledging these multiple aspects and ensuring each was properly handled through ritual. The vision quest, practiced in various forms across many tribes, involved deliberately seeking encounters with spirit beings. Young people would go alone to remote places, fasting and praying, waiting for visions that would guide their lives. The spirits encountered weren't necessarily ancestors, but could be animal spirits, nature spirits, or other supernatural beings. These encounters weren't frightening hauntings, but transformative experiences that established lifelong relationships with spiritual helpers. Navajo traditions include complex beliefs about the Chindi, the evil or harmful part of a person that remains after death. Traditional Navajos avoid the dead and places where people died because the Chindi can cause illness or misfortune. Elaborate purification ceremonies must be performed to cleanse people or places contaminated by contact with death. This isn't fear of the deceased person themselves, but recognition that death releases dangerous spiritual forces requiring careful management. The Anishinaabe peoples of the Great Lakes region traditionally believed in the path of souls, a journey the spirit must make after death. The Milky Way was seen as this path, leading to the land of the dead. The spirit traveled for 4 days, facing challenges and tests. Living family members had responsibilities to help the spirit successfully complete this journey through proper burial rituals and by placing offerings with the body. This cosmology connected astronomy, geography, and spiritual belief in beautiful ways. Northwest Coast peoples developed elaborate totem poles that represented family lineages and spiritual connections. While not graves exactly, these poles maintained relationships between living family members and their ancestral heritage. The supernatural beings depicted, thunderbirds, killer whales, bears, weren't ghosts but powerful spirits that clans claimed as ancestors or allies. These relationships provided identity, power, and connection across generations. Inuit traditions include the concept of tuangate, helping spirits that shamans could communicate with and sometimes control. These weren't deceased humans, but spirits that had always existed in spiritual form. Angaquit Inuit shamans would enter trance states to travel to spirit worlds, negotiate with supernatural beings, and bring back knowledge or healing. The boundaries between physical and spiritual worlds were understood as permeable, with skilled practitioners able to move between them. Among Amazonian peoples, shamans use ayahuasca and other plant medicines to communicate with spirit worlds. These experiences aren't hallucinations in the Western medical sense, but genuine encounters with spiritual dimensions of reality. The spirits of deceased shamans might appear as teachers. Nature spirits provide knowledge about plants and healing. Animal spirits offer power and protection. This pharmacological approach to spiritual encounter represents a sophisticated understanding of how consciousness can be altered to perceive non-ordinary realities. The Aztec beliefs about death were extraordinarily complex, with multiple afterlife destinations depending on how someone died. Warriors who died in battle and women who died in childbirth went to accompany the sun on its daily journey. Those who drowned or were killed by lightning went to Tlalocan, a paradise. Most others went to Mictlan, the underworld, requiring a difficult 4-year journey through various challenges. These beliefs reflected a worldview where death wasn't the end, but a transformation leading to new roles and responsibilities. Mayan cosmology included the Xibalba, the underworld realm described in the Popol Vuh. This wasn't simply a land of the dead, but a dangerous place populated by death gods and supernatural challenges. The hero twins of Mayan mythology journeyed to Xibalba, faced its trials, and ultimately defeated the death gods through cleverness and perseverance. This myth suggested that death itself could be challenged and overcome through wisdom and courage. What's crucial to understand is that colonization didn't just bring physical violence, but spiritual violence. Indigenous spiritual practices were often banned, ceremonial objects confiscated, sacred sites destroyed. Practitioners were punished, sometimes killed. Children were removed to boarding schools where indigenous languages and beliefs were actively suppressed. The goal was cultural genocide, the complete erasure of indigenous worldviews and their replacement with Christian European perspectives. Yet indigenous spiritual traditions proved remarkably resilient. Practices went underground, continued in secret, adapted to new circumstances. Knowledge was preserved through oral tradition despite attempts to erase it. Today, many indigenous communities are experiencing cultural revival, reclaiming traditional practices, teaching languages to younger generations, and asserting the validity and value of their ancestral spiritual knowledge. Modern indigenous peoples navigate between traditional beliefs and contemporary contexts in diverse ways. Some maintain traditional practices largely unchanged. Others blend indigenous and Christian elements, seeing no contradiction between honoring ancestors and accepting Jesus. Still, others have moved away from traditional beliefs, but maintain cultural connections through language, art, and community. There's no single indigenous approach, but thousands of unique paths forward. The concept of land-based spirituality is fundamental to many indigenous traditions. Spirits aren't just floating in abstract spiritual dimensions, they're connected to specific places. A mountain, river, forest, or rock formation might be home to powerful spirits. This creates spiritual geography where the physical landscape is simultaneously a map of sacred relationships and responsibilities. Disconnecting indigenous peoples from their traditional lands isn't just physical displacement, but spiritual violence that severs connections to ancestors, spirits, and sacred sites. Ghost beliefs among contemporary Native Americans often blend traditional concepts with elements from horror movies, Christian teachings, and pan-Indian spiritual movements. A Navajo teenager might simultaneously believe in traditional Chindi and in La Llorona stories learned from Mexican American friends. An Ojibwe family might maintain traditional tobacco offerings while also practicing Catholicism. These syncretisms aren't confusion, but creative adaptation, finding ways to honor multiple aspects of complex identities. What indigenous ghost traditions often share is emphasis on maintaining proper relationships, reciprocity, and respect. Spirits, whether ancestors or other supernatural beings, deserve acknowledgement and appropriate behavior. Ignoring or disrespecting spirits brings consequences. This isn't superstition but ethical framework that extends moral consideration beyond the human community to include ancestors, spirits, and the natural world itself. The Pacific Ocean covers nearly a third of the Earth's surface, dotted with thousands of islands whose peoples developed rich spiritual traditions shaped by their unique environments. Life on islands creates particular relationships with ancestors, land, and sea. The dead can't be buried far away. They remain on the island, part of the landscape, maintaining presence in community life. The ocean provides but also threatens, creating spirits that embody both abundance and danger. Hawaiian traditions include the night marchers, or huake po, processions of ghostly warriors who walk ancient paths on certain nights. Those who encounter them must show respect, lying face down and not looking at the procession. The warriors are not evil but powerful, and watching them without proper spiritual protection can cause death. These marchers follow routes that were sacred in life, demonstrating how spiritual geography persists beyond the lives of individuals who created it. The night marchers appear most often on moonless nights, preceded by sounds of drums, chanting, and the glow of torches. They might be heard before they're seen, giving those who know the signs time to hide or show proper respect. The procession includes not just warriors, but also chiefs and kahuna, priests, in full ceremonial regalia. They march to sacred sites, to battlefields, to places of great mana or spiritual power. Hawaiian beliefs also include aumakua, ancestral guardian spirits that often take animal forms. A family might have a shark, owl, or turtle as their aumakua, and that creature would be sacred to them, never harmed or eaten. These guardians watch over their descendants, sometimes appearing to warn of danger or offer guidance. The relationship is reciprocal. Families honor their aumakua through offerings and respect, and the guardian spirits provide protection and wisdom. Polynesian traditions across the Pacific share concepts of tapu, what anthropologists call taboo. This isn't just social prohibition, but spiritual danger. Certain places, times, and actions are tapu, charged with spiritual power that can harm those who violate restrictions. The dead are often tapu, requiring careful handling and prescribed rituals. This creates elaborate systems for managing relationships with the deceased and ensuring that their spiritual power doesn't harm the living. Maori traditions from New Zealand include the kehua, spirits of the dead who haven't properly transitioned to the afterlife. These spirits might linger near their burial places or homes, causing misfortune or illness to living relatives. Tohunga, traditional priests, perform rituals to help troubled spirits complete their journey to Hawaii, the ancestral homeland in the afterlife. The concept recognizes that some deaths are more difficult than others, creating confused or troubled spirits that need assistance from the living. The Maori concept of werua, the spirit or soul, doesn't simply disappear at death, but undertakes a journey. The spirit travels to Cape Reinga at the northern tip of New Zealand, the leaping place where spirits enter the underworld and return to Hawaii. This geographic specificity creates pilgrimage sites where the living can feel connected to the journeys of the deceased. The landscape itself becomes marked with spiritual significance. In Micronesian traditions, spirits of the dead often become associated with specific locations. An ancestor might be understood as residing in a particular tree, rock, or area of reef. Offerings are made at these places, and the spirit is consulted before important decisions. This creates intimate connections between people and landscape, where every element of the environment might have ancestral or spiritual associations. Melanesian cultures developed complex mortuary practices, reflecting beliefs about gradual transformation from living person to ancestor. In some traditions, bodies were kept in the house for extended periods, while the spirit gradually detached from the physical form. Offerings were made, conversations continued, and the deceased remained part of daily life during this transition. Only after proper ceremonies did the spirit fully join the ancestors, and the body could be finally interred. The Fijian concept of yalo includes both souls of the living and spirits of the dead. These spirits could be benevolent or malevolent, depending on their relationship with the living and the circumstances of death. Ancestral spirits provided guidance and protection when properly honored. Spirits of those who died badly through sorcery or violation of tapu became dangerous and required specialized ritual knowledge to manage or appease. Pacific Island ghost traditions reflect the realities of island life. Limited resources, environmental challenges, the importance of cooperation, and the closeness of communities where everyone is related. Ancestor spirits reinforce social obligations and proper behavior. They ensure that traditional knowledge is respected and transmitted. They maintain the presence of the past in contemporary life, creating continuity across generations. European contact and colonization brought tremendous disruption to Pacific spiritual traditions. Christian missionaries often worked aggressively to suppress indigenous practices, labeling them as devil worship or paganism. Traditional tattooing, dancing, and ceremonial practices were banned in many places. The introduction of European diseases killed huge portions of island populations, disrupting the transmission of traditional knowledge from elders to younger generations. Yet Pacific peoples preserved much of their spiritual heritage, often by blending it with Christianity in creative ways. Ancestor veneration continued, but was sometimes framed in Christian language. Traditional healers incorporated Christian prayers into their practices. Sacred sites maintained their significance even as churches were built nearby. This syncretism allowed communities to maintain cultural continuity while adapting to colonial pressures. Modern Pacific Islanders, whether living on their ancestral islands or in diaspora communities in New Zealand, Australia, or the United States, maintain diverse relationships with traditional beliefs. Some families practice traditional customs enthusiastically, seeing them as essential cultural identity. Others identify primarily as Christian, but maintain respect for certain traditional practices. Still others have moved away from both traditional and Christian beliefs, but feel connected to Pacific heritage through language, food, and community. Climate change now threatens Pacific Island communities in unprecedented ways. Rising sea levels endanger not just homes and infrastructure, but sacred sites, burial grounds, and the landscapes that hold spiritual meaning. The possibility of entire island nations becoming uninhabitable raises profound questions. What happens to land-based spirituality when the land itself disappears? Can ancestral connections survive forced migration? How do communities maintain relationships with spirits of place when those places no longer exist? These questions are urgent and real for Pacific peoples. Some communities are already planning for relocation, discussing how to maintain cultural identity and spiritual practices in new locations. Traditional knowledge holders work to document practices and stories, ensuring they survive even if islands don't. Young people learn traditional navigation, language, and ceremonies, asserting the value and viability of indigenous knowledge in the face of existential threats. Pacific ghost traditions ultimately reflect the same human needs as ghost beliefs everywhere. The desire to maintain connections with those we've lost, to honor the past while living in the present, to find meaning in death and continuity beyond individual lives. The specific forms these beliefs take, night marchers on ancient paths, ancestral sharks swimming in protecting circles, spirits residing in sacred trees, reflect the unique beauty and challenges of island life. But the underlying emotional and social functions remain deeply, recognizably human. Scroll through social media at 3 in the morning and you'll find them. Grainy videos claiming to show shadowy figures in abandoned hospitals, audio recordings of strange voices, photographs with unexplained anomalies circled in red. Comment sections fill with debates, believers sharing their own experiences, skeptics offering natural explanations, and people somewhere in between, uncertain but fascinated. Ghost hunting has gone digital, democratized, transformed from rare encounters whispered about in small communities to globally shared experiences debated by millions. The rise of reality television ghost hunting shows in the early 2000s transformed how English-speaking audiences engage with supernatural beliefs. Shows like Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, and Most Haunted popularized a particular approach. Teams of investigators with electronic equipment searching for evidence of paranormal activity. EMF meters that detect electromagnetic fields, digital recorders for capturing EVP, electronic voice phenomena, infrared cameras, motion sensors. The apparatus of technological ghost hunting has become instantly recognizable worldwide. This approach reflects particularly modern anxieties and desires. We want evidence, data, recordings, something we can analyze and verify. But we also want mystery, transcendence, proof that there's more to reality than material existence. Ghost hunting shows promise to deliver both, the thrill of supernatural encounter and the reassurance of scientific methodology. The result often satisfies neither completely, but provides compelling television. What's fascinating is how these shows have influenced ghost beliefs globally. The EMF meter, originally designed to detect electrical wiring problems, became a standard ghost hunting tool because American television said it detected spirits. Now people in countries with completely different ghost traditions use EMF meters, adopting this particular technological approach to supernatural investigation. Western ghost hunting methodology spreads through media, not through any proven effectiveness, but through the power of cultural influence. The internet has created unprecedented opportunities for sharing ghost experiences. Reddit communities dedicated to paranormal experiences, YouTube channels showing supposed evidence, TikTok videos of haunted locations, all allow people worldwide to participate in ghost culture regardless of their physical location. A teenager in rural Thailand can watch ghost investigations in American asylums. A college student in Brazil can share experiences with people in Japan. Ghost beliefs globalize and hybridize in real time. This creates interesting syncretisms. Someone might use sage smudging from Native American traditions, while reciting Christian prayers and checking an EMF meter, all while hunting for yurei-style ghosts in a European castle. Traditional ghost beliefs from different cultures blend with modern ghost hunting culture, creating new hybrid practices that would be unrecognizable to any single historical tradition. Urban legends spread globally now, adapted to local contexts. The Slender Man, created as internet fiction in 2009, became a modern ghost story that people genuinely feared, despite knowing its origin. The internet's ability to spread stories, rapidly means that fictional creations can achieve folkloric status within years rather than centuries. The line between traditional ghosts passed down through generations and contemporary creations that spread virally becomes increasingly blurred. Horror films have profoundly influenced how people experience and interpret supposed ghost encounters. The tropes of horror cinema, flickering lights, cold spots, objects moving on their own, strange sounds, have become the expected signs of haunting. When people report ghost experiences, they often describe phenomena they recognize from movies. This isn't necessarily fabrication. Expectations shape perception. We find what we're primed to look for. Japanese horror films, particularly Ringu, The Ring, and Ju-on, The Grudge, exported specific visual imagery of ghosts that influenced Western horror, and through that, Western ghost beliefs. The long-haired female ghost in white has become globally recognizable, appearing in American, Korean, Thai, and European horror films. This specific depiction of ghosts, rooted in Japanese cultural traditions, has achieved nearly universal recognition through media influence. Technology has changed not just how we hunt for ghosts, but what we consider evidence. In the past, ghost encounters were primarily experiential. You felt a presence, saw an apparition, heard something unexplained. These experiences were personal, subjective, difficult to share except through storytelling. Now, people attempt to capture evidence that can be shared digitally: recordings, photographs, sensor readings. The standard of proof has shifted toward technological mediation. Yet this creates interesting paradoxes. The more sophisticated our recording technology becomes, the easier it is to fake evidence. Digital manipulation means any photograph or video of supposed paranormal activity must be met with skepticism. Meanwhile, the very expectation that ghosts should be technologically detectable reflects modern assumptions about the nature of reality. Why would spirits of the dead interact with electromagnetic fields or appear on infrared cameras? These assumptions aren't based on traditional ghost lore, but on contemporary beliefs about what real means. Ghost tourism has become a significant global industry. Cities market their haunted histories, offering ghost tours that blend entertainment with local history and folklore. Hotels advertise their ghostly residents as amenities. Abandoned hospitals and asylums host paid paranormal investigations. This commercialization transforms hauntings from frightening realities to consumable experiences, from genuine belief to entertaining possibility. The economic implications are significant. Historic preservation of supposedly haunted buildings becomes financially viable through ghost tourism. Local economies benefit from people traveling to experience famous hauntings. The Tower of London's ghosts are worth millions in tourism revenue. This creates incentives to maintain and promote ghost stories regardless of anyone's genuine beliefs. Ghosts become heritage, tourist attractions, commercial products. Yet beneath the commercial surface and technological apparatus, genuine ghost experiences continue. People still report encounters they can't explain, feelings of presence, sightings of figures that shouldn't exist, sounds and movements without apparent cause. These experiences happen to skeptics and believers alike, to people who have never seen a ghost hunting show and those who have watched hundreds of hours. The phenomenology of ghost encounters remains consistent even as the frameworks for interpreting them shift. Sleep paralysis, a neurological phenomenon where people wake unable to move and often experience hallucinations, explains many supposed ghost encounters. The feeling of a presence in the room, seeing shadowy figures, sensing malevolent intentions, these are common features of sleep paralysis that appear across cultures. Yet even understanding the neurological mechanism doesn't fully resolve the experience. Knowing your brain is creating the sensation doesn't make it less terrifying in the moment. Grief creates its own encounters with the dead. Recently bereaved people frequently report sensing the presence of deceased loved ones, seeing them briefly, hearing their voices, or feeling their touch. Psychologists recognize these experiences as normal parts of grief, the mind's way of gradually adjusting to loss. But for those experiencing them, the boundary between psychological phenomena and genuine supernatural encounter isn't always clear or important. If sensing your deceased mother's presence brings comfort, does it matter whether it's real in an objective sense? Modern ghost culture reflects contemporary anxieties about death in societies that hide dying and dead bodies, about meaning in increasingly secular contexts, about technology's promise to reveal or control everything, about maintaining connections in an age of isolation and mobility. Ghosts persist not despite modernity, but perhaps because of it, offering experiences of mystery, transcendence, and connection that feel increasingly scarce in everyday life. We've traveled the world tonight. What becomes clear through this global journey is that ghost beliefs aren't about ghosts at all, not really. They're about the living, about how we process loss, maintain relationships beyond death, transmit values across generations, and create meaning from mortality. The specific forms that ghosts take tell us what each culture fears and values, how they understand the boundaries between self and other, living and dead, natural and supernatural. Vengeful ghosts appear in cultures where justice is uncertain or delayed. La Llorona, yurei, lemures, all these dangerous spirits represent deaths that were wrong, murders unpunished, lives cut short unjustly. They allow communities to acknowledge that the world isn't fair, that terrible things happen, and that those terrible things have consequences that persist beyond individual deaths. These ghosts demand acknowledgement, offering narrative frameworks for processing trauma and demanding justice. Protective ancestral spirits appear in cultures that emphasize family obligation and intergenerational continuity. African ancestors, Asian family spirits, Pacific guardian, Aumakua, all maintain active relationships with descendants. They reward proper behavior and punish neglect. They preserve tradition and enforce social norms. These spirits allow communities to maintain connection with their history, give authority to elders and tradition, and create frameworks where the past remains relevant and active in present life. The rituals surrounding death and ghosts serve profound psychological and social functions. Funerals don't just dispose of bodies, they transform the deceased from living person to ancestor, from presence to memory, from here to somewhere else. Offerings give bereaved people constructive ways to express ongoing love and obligation. Annual festivals honoring the dead create communal spaces for processing grief that might otherwise remain private and isolating. Exorcisms provide frameworks for addressing persistent trauma or mental illness through spiritual intervention. What's remarkable is how these practices work whether or not ghosts literally exist in an objective sense. The anthropologist might explain ancestor veneration as social mechanism for maintaining family cohesion and transmitting values. The psychologist might interpret ghost sightings as grief hallucinations or sleep paralysis. The neuroscientist might locate spiritual experiences in specific brain regions activated by prayer or meditation. Yet these explanations don't diminish the power of the experiences or the effectiveness of the practices. A person mourning a parent doesn't care whether their sense of parental presence is really the parent's ghost or their own mind's creation. The comfort, the guidance, the sense of ongoing connection, these are real regardless of metaphysical truth. A community maintaining ancestral altars isn't performing empty ritual. They're preserving history, reinforcing values, creating intergenerational connection. The function remains regardless of whether spirits literally exist. This suggests that asking "are ghosts real?" might be the wrong question, or at least an incomplete one. More interesting questions might be, what work do ghost beliefs do? What needs do they meet? What would we lose if we stopped believing in ghosts? What do our ghosts reveal about what we value, fear, and hope for? Modern Western skepticism often dismisses ghost beliefs as primitive superstition, destined to fade as education and science advance. Yet ghost beliefs persist across education levels, socioeconomic status, and geographical locations. Scientists have ghost experiences. Rationalists report unexplained phenomena. Perhaps this persistence suggests that ghost beliefs serve functions that science and reason can't fully replace. In an age of increasing isolation, geographic mobility, and family fragmentation, ghost beliefs maintain connections across distance and death. When families are scattered across continents, when people die far from their birthplaces, when communities fragment and reform repeatedly, the idea that the dead remain present and connected offers comfort. Ghosts provide continuity in discontinuous lives. In increasingly secular societies where traditional religions decline, ghost beliefs offer alternative frameworks for transcendence and meaning. They suggest that death isn't absolute ending, that consciousness might persist in some form, that there's more to reality than material existence. They provide mystery and wonder in a world that science has largely demystified. They make space for experiences that don't fit neatly into rational categories. Ghost beliefs also enforce ethical behavior in ways that might serve positive social functions. The idea that ancestors watch and judge encourages people to consider how their actions reflect on family and community. The belief that the dead require proper treatment reinforces careful attention to death rituals and grief processes. The fear of becoming a troubled ghost might discourage behaviors that create regret and unfinished business. These beliefs embed ethics in supernatural frameworks that feel more compelling than abstract moral philosophy. Yet ghost beliefs can also be harmful. They can create fear that interferes with daily life. They can be used to manipulate and control, threatening supernatural punishment for disobedience. They can prevent proper grief processing when people remain too attached to the deceased. They can reinforce harmful traditions under the authority of ancestral spirits. Like any powerful belief system, ghost traditions can serve both constructive and destructive purposes depending on how they're used. The future of ghost beliefs remains uncertain. Will they fade as the world becomes more educated and scientific? Or will they adapt and persist, finding new forms in digital age? Current evidence suggests the latter. Ghost beliefs are transforming, incorporating technology, spreading globally through media, creating new hybrid forms that blend traditions from multiple cultures. But they're not disappearing. If anything, interest in the paranormal seems to be growing, particularly among younger generations seeking meaning and mystery in rationalized world. Perhaps ghosts will always be with us because they address fundamental human needs. The need to maintain bonds with those we love beyond death, the need to find meaning in mortality, the need for mystery and transcendence, the need to believe that our lives and deaths matter in lasting ways. These needs aren't likely to disappear as long as humans remain mortal, social beings who form attachments and seek meaning. Tonight we've walked with spirits through every corner of our world, from misty Japanese forests to Latin American waterways, from African family shrines to Pacific Island shores. We've met hungry ghosts and protective ancestors, wailing women and night marchers. Each culture's ghosts are unique, yet they all speak to the same fundamental human experiences. Love that persists beyond death, grief that demands expression, memory that refuses to fade. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the spirit-haunted corners of our world. If you're already drifting off, then our mission is complete. But if you're still awake, perhaps another deep dive through the archives will finally carry you to rest. Until we meet again in these quiet hours, may the spirits who watch over you be gentle. May your ancestors smile on your dreams. And may you find peace in knowing that love will transcend even the boundary between worlds.